Welcome back to season 2 of The Owner's Seat, the show where founders, franchisees, and operators stop pretending everything's fine and actually talk about the numbers, decisions, and hard seasons it takes to grow, to be an entrepreneur, to be a business owner. This is where we get into unit economics, cash flow, hiring mistakes, expansion bets, and the messy middle of ownership. So you stay in control of your business instead of letting it run you. Today's guest is living the multi-unit, multi-brand game a lot of owners say they want and facing the realities most don't see coming. I'm sitting down with Tanner Holmes, so excited, multi-unit, multi-brand franchisee, investor, and area developer across Illinois and Wisconsin. He's behind locations for amazing brands like Perspire Sauna Studio, Sola Salon Studios, and a portfolio under Impact Brands LLC focused on health, wellness, I love this, and beauty. Tanner is the franchise operator people picture. He's the real deal. And when they say, I want multiple territories and brands, this is the guy you want to listen to. But behind all of that is the real grit. He is very vocal on LinkedIn around his first year pain, the cash flow pressures, culture that either holds or cracks, and the constant question that all of us business leaders typically ask, how fast is too fast? In this episode, we're going to dig into what first-year franchise ownership actually feels like, the emotional and financial toll of 1 foot in and 1 foot out, how Tanner thinks about multi-brand expansion and pacing growth, what it's really like being a Perspire Sauna Studio franchisee and Sola. We're going to talk about that too, and how longevity concepts fit into a real P&L, not just a trend deck. Tanner, so pumped. I've been looking forward to this for months. Welcome to the Owner's Seat.
We've had this on the calendar for a while, man. I agree. I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So good. Well, I know you are a wealth of knowledge. I love your impact that you make on LinkedIn, from leadership to inspiration. There's sometimes where I open it up and I need a little Tanner juice. Like, give me the real deal, Tanner. I want to see the quotes. I want to see what you're thinking. And then also too, a behind the scenes look into what is this really like? It's not necessarily always rainbows and butterflies being a franchise owner, being an investor. And so I'm excited to jump in. And actually, the first question that I wanted to ask you to kick this thing off is, what drew you to franchising in the first place?
Thanks, Albert. I was really privileged to have grown up in an entrepreneurial house. And coincidentally, my dad's business, which was an indoor tanning salon, ended up becoming a franchise. So by nature of where I grew up and how I grew up, I got to grow up in that business and from a very early age, see what entrepreneurship looked like and get an extremely early taste into franchising.
Amazing. That's awesome. And so it sounds like it's in the blood, right? And kudos to your pops for going. What was that like, living and growing up in a household where, typically you get hey, climbed up the corporate ladder, was there for 20 years, and not many, it's rare that you get the opportunity to learn about money and business and being an owner and, developing a team and things like that. How was that for you?
Yeah, I like to say I got my undergrad education in entrepreneurship and my MBA came from the dinner table. My
I
dad was
love that.
extremely involved. Whether we liked it or not, we were involved, right? As soon as we could hold a paintbrush or a screwdriver, we were in the salons. And so we got both the viewpoint of watching the freedom and watching what success and entrepreneurship can bring. But we also saw the lows and saw the bad days as well, which really set us up for success. And for me in particular, there aren't a lot of surprises. My dad's famous words in retail: it'll take longer, it'll cost more, and it'll make less. And the reality is that's usually the truth. And so sometimes life is just about having the right expectations. And in my case, I think I did.
Do y'all see what I'm talking about? This is what I mean when I need the Tannerisms. I need the quotes. I'm stealing that. That is so good. It's so true. And you just seem to know what is going, like, meaning what is hot in the marketplace. You're in tanning and beauty and wellness, now longevity. What are you finding is the common thread amongst them all?
Yeah, I think more than anything, the first answer that comes to mind is people. People make or break any business. And I don't care if you're selling widgets or in the personal fitness space, it doesn't matter. Your people will make your business. Ultimately, that is kind of my foundation. I think it's the thing I focus on when evaluating concepts, and certainly
Mhm.
when operating concepts. It starts and ends with people. I think on top of that, I'm curious. And I think in franchising, especially, the diligence process and the resources available are really quite limitless. If you're willing to be curious, if you're willing to explore, it takes time, it takes energy.
Mhm.
But those resources exist. And that's one of my favorite things about franchising.
That's what I love about you, and you promote this a lot. It's, hey, it doesn't start with the financials. It actually doesn't even start with the member experience quite yet. It is the team member, the employee culture, the team member experience that is the number one most important. And what I love about what you put out there on LinkedIn and some others is you're all about leadership. And one of the things I saw you post about, and I felt it as we chatted previous to this, or even behind camera before this, or when I read your posts, like you can feel, you say infectious optimism. Can you walk us through that and how you keep that? That's very hard to do. Like you said, it takes a lot of energy and time. How do you keep that alive in all of the businesses that you lead?
It's a really great question. And so my current life's motto is to live with infectious optimism and to inspire others through health and adventure. And for me, I think it actually kind of started in an unhealthy place with respect to optimism. I thought optimism was forced. I thought you wake up and whether or not you have a smile, you put it on anyway. And while some days that might be true, I think I've really shifted my mindset into finding the optimism. There's always something to be grateful for, and it doesn't supersede or take the place of negative emotions. The reason I say that is I think infectious optimism really requires authenticity. It's not smiling when things are bad and telling everyone that it's okay. I think optimism is seeing the good despite also being aware and communicating, the bad or the ugly. And optimism goes the furthest in my experience when it is the most difficult to find. For me, it partially comes naturally, but I've also recognized as a leader, if I can't walk in with energy, I'm
Right.
setting the baseline. My energy, my output, and ultimately what I pay attention to, the team will pay attention to, and the guest experience really gets predicated by the staff experience. I love to say that, and we
Love
love
that.
to say smile for the guests, right? But you can fake a smile, but you can also read a fake smile in
Hmm.
my. And so the infectious optimism, it's near and dear to my heart. I think it's very important, but I also think it should be an expression of authenticity and transparency. It shouldn't be faked. It
Yeah.
should it should be molded.
I just mentioned something and I posted about this the other day, but what I love about you is you're not interested in leadership. You're committing. You have committed to leadership. And when you commit to leadership, yeah, it's harder. Yeah, it takes time. Yeah, it's mentally taxing to keep this infectious optimism going, but that's what you committed to. Interested is, yeah, I want to be a leader, but are you really willing to put in the work like Tanner? And Tanner, I mean, everyone that I've chatted with, and I obviously have some experience with Perspire and all of that, but they all talk great about your leadership and what you do and being in the trenches. Y'all go look at his LinkedIn. He's in it. And we'll talk about some of the messiness there, like
Oh yeah,
pipes and all the guts of a box. I mean, there's so many things that could go wrong too, but you go in, like you say, with a smile on your face and your energy, man. Even on I saw you on the news the other day. I love that. That was awesome.
yeah. Yeah, one thing to add there, I can't control the status of my HVAC system. I can't control the outside weather. I can't control what happens inside that box, but we can certainly control our approach and how we respond to it.
So
And
cool.
that's where optimism comes in.
Well, I was thinking about you the other day. My son, he broke my heart though. And this didn't remind me of you. I'll get to that in a sec, but he let me know he's 8 years old. His name's Jameson. He said, Dad, I don't want to play sports. I want to be a Boy Scout. I'm like, where did you learn this? Because I didn't grow up that way. And funny enough, can't come to find that my dad was in Boy Scouts. I had no clue. We've never talked about this. So now there's this grandpa grandson relationship, and he had the whole little I don't know if you even call that thing, but it has this whole uniform down. And we go to these meetings, we're building stuff, we're racing. So I'm so excited. But then as I learned more about you, you were an Eagle Scout.
Yeah.
So speaking of leadership, Jesus, I've learned so much now. I feel like I'm in it. I'm like reading all the books. I want to know all the symbols. I want to know everything. How has that shaped your leadership style?
I love that you brought that up. It's not something I think about often. I enjoyed it. So my dad was adamant. This was something that, frankly, was kind of more of a requirement than an interest to start. But my twin brother and I fell in love with it. So we went through Scouts all the way through. Um, the Boy Scout motto is be prepared. And I
Mm.
really never forget that. I think, yes, I learned to tie some knots. Yes, I can pitch a tent faster than just about anybody else. But I think the most important lesson is being prepared, thinking through planning, thinking through where you're going to be, what you're going to need. You check everything, you bring a backup of everything. And, in the wilderness, it can be quite forgiving, or excuse me, unforgiving,
Right.
if you are not prepared. And we learn the hard way many weekends and cold campouts or blaring heat. But being prepared, I think, is an important lesson and something I've definitely taken through and from scouts.
So cool. I'm looking forward to spending more time and learning this just new. I was not necessarily a jock, but it was like all sports and nothing else. Well, no, I did play the clarinet, but I'm loving this like new journey, and I get to experience it with not only through my son and through his eyes, but with them as well. So I'm looking forward
It's
to
an
it.
adventure.
I
Yeah.
cannot do a tent. I cannot do a knot. So I'll be learning that. I'll let you know when I get it.
Yeah. Good luck.
Speaking of being prepared, and I want to switch gears here because I think a lot, and I think you'll agree with this because you're very direct on LinkedIn. I like that about you. Sometimes you just see the highlight reels. And you understand very well what it's like to be that first year, first time franchisee. And sometimes underestimating how hard it is gets a lot of these first year franchisees in trouble. And they're not prepared. So you speak a lot about preparation. What do you feel like has been the biggest wake up call and just in your lessons that you've learned along the way, maybe from your pops or even yourself personally, that you help other owners, or today you want to just share, hey, look out for these things, like make sure you prep for this.
Yeah, great question. I've been a part of now 5 different franchise concepts and operated, 25 plus retail stores. I think
Wow.
more than anything else, I think you really just don't know what you don't know. And unfortunately, I think there are a lot of people that end up buying a license for any specific brand without necessarily understanding that it will be difficult. There will be challenges. There are going to be situations that are unique to you. And also at the end of the day, it takes a village. Now,
Right.
franchising is a great resource. And I think in the right brand and the right system, you can pay to avoid a learning curve, right? That's part of the model. That said, you are also still a part of the learning curve. And I
Mhm.
think it's forgotten on a lot of, or lost on a lot of, especially newer franchisees that don't understand we are all still learning every day. And I think there are a lot of folks that enter franchising. I would almost say the sense of ignorance. And I hate to use that word, but I think it's the reality, which
Right.
is there's probably a high correlation to the amount of diligence that someone spends through the initial stages of evaluating a franchise or multiple franchises, and ultimately the success that they may or may not have down the line, right? It takes a
Right.
village. Franchising is an incredible value because you have support. You have support at the HQ level, you have support at the franchisee level. There's an ecosystem for you to tap into. I believe in my experience, a lot of newer franchisees expect the help to show up. And to some degree, this can be true. And I think great models will figure out how to support, to the nth degree. And on top of that, it is also the responsibility of the franchisee to seek the help and support that they need, whether that's from other franchisees, whether that's from a business coach, whether that's somebody like you that has an expertise in evaluating financials and you've looked at boxes much larger, much smaller than, take Perspire, for example. But it takes being active, right? We connected on LinkedIn. We wouldn't have connected, had I not been active on LinkedIn, I imagine.
Yeah.
And it took me being active and you being active and we connected. And so you got to be out there. You got to be willing to fail. And I think more than anything else, you have to understand you will need to ask for help. And that is okay. I still ask for help on a regular
Love
basis.
that.
But yeah, I think that's something that a lot of newer franchisees miss is gotta ask for help.
Yeah. I can relate with that on a lot of levels on both ends of it. And I love that you share that. And I think, especially in the first year, and I think there are many that see these opportunities. Clearly, they've read, item 19. They've read the FDD, and there's some sort of subjective passion for it all too. Right? It's like, wow, this is a great deal. So the skin in the game for them is the dollar. However, there is that inflection point. Are you going to be in the trenches? It takes a village that first year, maybe that second year, or are you going to be more of an investor absent franchise owner?
Agreed,
What
and
I've seen is sometimes it works. In a lot of cases, it doesn't. And I saw what you posted too. I really love what you said. You said if you try to keep one foot in and one foot out, business will eat you alive. And I feel like that can correlate to those examples right there.
Yeah. And that, and that can be a matter of time. That can be a matter of energy. That can be a matter of financial investment.
Right.
You have to be all in. And it doesn't mean that this has to be your singular focus in life. However, in my experience, it does mean that when you're working on the business, you got to be all in. You got to make decisions like you're all in as well.
Sure. And so how do you coach others and mentor others and partner with others on that, what we'd call the survival year? Like, can we get to that first opening? Can we get to that MBOW, that membership count, that utilization? Let's get through so we're cash flowing. Like, how do you get them to understand the cash flow side, the patience side, and sometimes there's a psychological effect. They've never owned something like this. And in the cases we were bringing up earlier in the beauty and wellness space, they might have come from a completely different industry, but are so passionate about the wellness and fitness space. How do you get them through that self-belief process that no, keep going, keep digging in?
I think it's a Mike Tyson quote that goes, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth.
Right.
The reason that resonates, and I already mentioned setting expectations, I really think it's one of the biggest pieces. And that's not just painting a picture of exactly what it's going to look like. In fact, it's quite the opposite. So for me, I've been an area developer and I'm currently an area developer for the
Right.
Perspire system. It is my responsibility, I view, to really properly set expectations of what
Yeah.
great can look like, but
Mm.
also of what the opposite side of the spectrum could look like. It's about, you're a finance guy, you understand, and as I've gotten to learn from you, right? You build multiple models. You don't just build one, if this is what it looks like, best case scenario. Now, it's important to understand what best case scenario could or will look like. Absolutely. We should all strive to that. And you should also have a budget built for what is worst case scenario. And again, with the expectations, there's a difference between understanding that it's going to take me 9 months to get to profitability. Perfect. I've got the right working cap. I understand the timeline. For a lot of folks, it means timing either personal investments and or another job. Great. You can set the plan with that. If you don't know it's going to take 9 months to get profitable, and either somebody through the sales process, didn't convey that information, or you frankly, again, didn't do the research, speak to the open operators, and not just one or two, but as many as you can to understand what the realistic expectation is. So plan for all case scenarios. And again, in my belief, the proper diligence and the proper research in the system, will give you the information on best case, worst case, and you can plan for both, because that's the reality. Is we all want best case, no doubt about it. But in my experience, most of us that have been doing this a while also experience worst case at some point. And man, am I glad when I have the cash in the account to get through those tough days, and just have the expectation. This is so much about mental fortitude.
Yeah.
You wake up every day having no idea when that trail ends. It can be brutal. But if I know I got to make it 9 months, I can stick it in for 9 months, knowing there's some reprieve at the end. I think we all feel a lot more comfortable with information. Information is power, even if it's not great information.
It's so good. And I love that you bring up the mental fortitude. It's funny. I've told my story a couple times, but I come from a long line of entrepreneurs and spent a lot of time with my dad on construction sites at the dump. But one of the things he would always tell me is you don't want to be an entrepreneur. And I don't know if he thought I was soft or something, because clearly he knew exactly what you're putting down there around mental fortitude. He's like, no, go do, get a good education, climb the corporate ladder. And I did that, and I still had the itch, right? It's in the blood. But it's a whole different ballgame, like you're saying. It's nothing like having, an ecosystem in corporate America. This almost the layers of bureaucracy actually protect you and your mental fortitude, because you don't have to deal with the ups and downs. And I think that's spot on.
But you hit a nail on the head, right? I think if you truly believe you're an entrepreneur, someone telling you you're not, or no, or don't do it won't stop you, right? But I
Mhm.
think with respect to the franchise sales process, I'm a believer that it should start with selling people out of a concept. If they still have interest, they're the
Like
right
that,
folk. But again, they need to understand, and to me, it's very, very important that everybody understands what all possibilities really look like.
for sure.
That piece can be missing in franchise sales.
Yeah, you fired me up on that one. I love that. And so what Tanner's talking about is scenario-based planning, right? Sensitivity models. So what happens, and I'm talking to you all listening and watching, what happens if your lead traffic drops by 10% Q1, right around the corner as you're doing your budgeting process, if you're not done already? What happens if it lifts up by 20%? What happens if your utilization's up 15% next quarter, next year? What does that do to the revenue line items? What does that do to flow through to your bottom line? What happens if, shoot, I didn't realize that my state is going through a minimum wage adjustment right around the corner, and now my payroll margin has lifted up 5 points? What does that do to your bottom line? And so you're building out different budgets, right? Different layers of budgets that is focused on each one of these scenarios so that when it happens, to Tanner's point, it's going to happen. One of my favorite movies, by the way. Now you're making me think of Interstellar, Murphy's Law. What can happen can happen. It's
Yeah.
going to happen. So have a playbook ready to rock versus thinking it's just going to be linear in that one way. So Tanner, you got me all jacked. I love that. I love that type of
Hey,
stuff.
that one came from you. I give you full credit for that one. I've learned the hard way, scenario planning. This is no doubt the truth.
For sure. Well, you not only spend time with new builds, but also acquisitions. What have you learned about the two? Because there's some that are listening right now. They've done the new build piece, but now they're scoping out the market and they're probably realizing there's some opportunities there. Is there anything in regards to risk management that maybe if you've learned or others have probably learned and shared with you that they just miscalculated between the two, new build and acquisition?
Yeah, I'm asked a lot, right? Do I build new or do I acquire? Usually, my answer, like most answers, is it depends. And for me, so much of it really comes down to who are you? What are your goals, right? I really do believe many entrepreneurs, myself very much included, and this is very much the case in franchising, it turns into a growth for the sake of growth mindset. And so I think it has to start with the question, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? And then, I think growth by acquisition is a beautiful way to scale in the right way. In my experience, typically it's one of the least expensive ways to grow. Certainly if you can identify underperformers, right? As we know, you can buy the underperformer for a whole lot less than you can buy, the franchisee that's crushing it. And there are advantages to doing both. However, in my experience, most newer franchisees or folks that are trying to scale for the first time or potentially without PE backing or VC backing or substantial financing, growth by acquisition is beautiful. And in my experience, really requires a very strong playbook for operation. So, in European Wax Center, we ended up, my partners and I, with 12 locations, 6 we developed, 6 we acquired. So it's
Great
kind of a
brand.
sample for this conversation, having half built, half acquired. And part of it depends on what you're acquiring. Not every store's built the same and models change over time. So that's a piece and part of it. It depends. In my experience, though, it can be a significant advantage specific to franchising because unlike growth by acquisition in other models, we are buying the exact same business, right? You're just buying another store. And ideally, it's a new set of keys. It's a new set of name tags. But for the most part, you're operating the same playbook. So
Amazing.
underutilized, in my opinion, certainly leveraged by the sophisticated investors and operators. I'd love to see more of it from younger and newer franchisees. I think it's a way to grow.
Hey, maybe this might be the pivot point, the inflection point. They listen to this and it's like, I'm going to reach out to Tanner. Let's get it done. I love it. Well, speaking of multi-unit, right? Multi-brand, multi-unit. I can only imagine just as you're taking care of the books and you're thinking about resource allocation, even cash flow, as you're cash flowing some of these and where you reposition that money to invest in maybe a overperformer, underperformer as you're trying to balance that all out, or even taking on a new project, expanding into different markets or expanding your portfolio and footprint. How do you like to organize all those things? And what have you learned throughout time about yourself and just what it takes to organize all that?
I smile, Albert, because I've learned so much through this process. And I will be very honest, it's hard. It's way harder than I anticipated. It's way harder than I thought. And ultimately, I chased shiny objects far more times than I really actually made the right decision with respect to evaluating other brands and certainly in some cases in my past investing in other brands. And so first and foremost, I think it's a cautionary tale. Mumbo is a fun term to use, right? Multi-unit, multi-brand operator. That said, in my experience, it's more challenging than you may think it is. And at the end of the day, sometimes you're far better off staying focused on the concept that you've got and evaluating your potential for expansion. So I think in my experience, my first question for anybody considering expanding into another brand is, have you really exhausted all options? Do you genuinely feel like there either isn't a reason to continue to reinvest in the brand that you're operating in, Or in the instance where you found stability, there's free cash flow, you can continue building that brand number one and focus on number two. That's where I've found more value. But I've made that decision too quickly, and instead of potentially harming a second brand, you're harming your first two, right? So
Sure.
it costs more to get the second brand off the ground, and the second brand reduced, the financial performance of the first brand. And so it can be tricky, it can be challenging, it takes a lot of time. I think something I've learned is you have to really understand what you can and can't share. So my example is I was operating as a multi-unit European wax center operator and got involved in an eyelash extension brand called Hush Lash Studio. Awesome brand.
Mhm.
I shouldn't have invested, not because it wasn't the right brand, it wasn't the right timing for me. And I really just assumed copy and paste European Wax Center to Lash Model. We'll use the same people, we'll use the same back office, all the admin support will align. And it was a lot more complicated than that. So again, in franchising in most systems, you're going to have required systems and tools. So two different POS systems, two different scheduling systems, two different payroll systems, and some you can combine, some you cannot. So my learning there is find out truly what can you use in business one to leverage into business two, but be realistic. I wasn't, and truthfully, it ended up hurting me. Now I think I've since figured it out, and I'm extremely happy with the two brands that we're operating right now. However, they don't really have a lot of overlap or flexibility with respect to operating both. So they're actually really quite siloed with respect to the business. And that's okay because I knew that going into it. Again, proper expectations, the right diligence led to proper expectations, which has led to a great result.
It's amazing. Wow, there's a lot there. I love it. And it's funny because, and by the way, thank you for sharing your own example. Super helpful. And I was just visualizing how you were going through that and getting through and the learning lessons as you've reflected. I had a couple of recent examples where two amazing brands, two separate scenarios, but similar stories where they were so passionate. There was so much momentum subjectively and maybe even momentum on top line revenue. But as you looked at bottom line, it was 6 cents, 9 cents on the dollar. And in another case, not necessarily printing money yet, right? Actually burning cash. Although there was somewhat of a cushion in the checking account, right? From some type of injection or investment. Yet we're talking about location number two. I'm like, oh my goodness, hold on. Let's pump the brakes because there's so much more that we need to figure out here. Because if you think you're going to replicate this, you're going to go replicate 6 cents on the dollars or worse. Because this happens to be the flagship. And typically location two maybe is at times isn't as strong as that one or that first one. And so it's just something to think about for those listening. If you're thinking about expansion, by the way, what a great example from Tanner as you heard him go through that and how you think about these things, due diligence, preparation, expectations. But then also too, what is your existing fleet looking like or unit looking like? And if that is not a 30 cents on the dollar plus, I would say, hold on. Let's figure out how we create more optimization. How do we optimize your existing portfolio or your existing unit? And then we can chat about, once that's done, then chat about, all right, well, we can go now cash flow or work on and invest in something
Yeah.
additional, right?
And if I could hit the nail on the coffin on that, I think you said that beautifully. You really start with why. Like, what is
Right.
your why? Why
Yeah.
are you doing this? In many cases, in my own personal experience, if I truly get to the why, much of it is ego driven, as decisions can be sometimes. And I am far better off admitting that, evaluating that, and then potentially moving on. What is your why? Is it about cash flow? Is it about investment? Is it about the ego of saying I got more? Sometimes it can be, but the right why can also carry you through, tremendous difficulty without a doubt.
So good. Well, speaking of wide, let's pivot into, and we were kind of chatting about it earlier, but the team member, the employee experience culture and leadership. And you posted something, and I was really intrigued, and I'd love to chat with what about it and see what you meant by it. You said culture is the soil where vision grows or withers. How do you keep the soil healthy amongst your team and your two different brands?
Yeah, I love that phrase. I think there's a lot of ways to interpret that all meaningfully. To me, the most obvious way to start the framing is who's the first person that your customer sees, whether it's picking up the phone, searching Google, walking through the front door. In many cases, it is not us as the owner, right? It is somebody on your team. And in my opinion, they have far more power over the success of your business because they're the ones that are truly interacting with service, at least in my business, obviously being service based. Culture is finicky though, in my opinion, because it isn't all puppies and rainbows. And I think a lot of people think that it may be, right? It's not just about bringing cupcakes to the break room or wishing people happy birthday. Culture is just as much acknowledging the truth, the reality, and pushing people through challenge and, holding people accountable. So to me, culture isn't just the light, fluffy word that I think a lot of people use it as. For me, culture are the rules of your organization. It is, what do I do when? And so, for example, for me, I want to know that every single person on my team, if you walk into a studio and you see piece of trash at your feet, that you pick it up. Well, how do you ingrain that into the culture, so to speak, right? Well, I think it's
So good.
behaviors. So every time I walk into a studio, if there's anything that I want to be addressed, I will address it myself first and foremost because I want to set that benchmark, right? That is part of culture. It's the quiet rules. And it is also how people feel. We really see the sauna studios, we love to use the word sanctuary because I think it's such a beautiful description
Right.
for people to feel that word. And for us, we recognize it won't feel like a sanctuary for our guests and members if it doesn't feel like a sanctuary for our teams. And so feedback is critical. You have to get information in order to make decisions on other people's behalf. And
Yeah, it's so good.
one last piece on culture, I see the mistake made, and again, I've made this mistake as well. A lot of entrepreneurs view culture as their own perspective, which is, what is the culture I want? And that isn't necessarily a bad or wrong perspective. I would also argue there's just as much value in really putting yourself in the perspective of your team members to say, what's the culture that they want? We built things for ourselves, and that's true. But at the end of the day, franchising and my businesses are serving people that are not myself. And I want to make sure that we're serving them in the best way possible. So you got to ask the
So
question. You got to
good.
meet people where they want to be.
Such good gems and education around servant. I'm hearing a ton. Servant leadership, meeting your team out where they're at, getting into their shoes and their perspective. And you talk about a feedback loop. So helpful. Just these things go a long way. To your point, it's not about just the cupcakes and the pizza or the donuts that morning or what the coffee. And those are important. Birthdays, anniversaries, those special moments. But it's also that hip to hip, getting in the trenches with your team, which you do so well. Now I'm curious, how do you set the boundaries of transparency? Because I'm a big proponent of that. I like to keep things up there front and center with my team. They need to know what's going on. That being said, and I learned this earlier in my career, sometimes you got to create boundaries, right? There's a time and a place, and there's the need to know. And typically that need to know is very thin, but in order to protect everything, the business, privacy, whatever, you do got to create a boundary. How do you juggle that? How do you juggle transparency and knowing what you should be sharing, what you shouldn't?
I love your questions. I love this conversation for what it's worth. So the first thing that pops in my head is something that we talk about during onboarding. I've never worked in corporate America. I've had internships, but I think sometimes that plays to my advantage because I don't know what the rules are. So I don't really play by the rules. I just do what I think is right. One of those things is we don't tell our teams that we are family. And here's
Hmm.
why. I want people to know their family is their family. You don't fire, well, in some cases, you might be in a position to fire siblings, but at the end of the day, you don't fire them as your sibling. You might fire them as a staff member. But the reality is, there is something different between work and family. And it doesn't mean that we can't take elements of family and bring them into our culture, right? We care about one another deeply. I believe that it is possible to feel deeply enough to consider some deep relationships within staff. And we also set the expectation that this isn't your family, meaning we have different expectations than your family. So for us, so much of it is about communicating the standards up front. I think so often
Uh,
people are okay following the rules. They just need to know what the rules are.
Right.
In my opinion, if you're not interviewing fiercely on core values, then the wrong folks are going to enter the organization and you're gonna be misaligned on expectations from the start because you're misaligned on core values. So expectations is huge for me. I used to be a big time people pleaser. I wanted to keep everybody happy. I thought the best answer was whatever led to the least amount of confrontation. And I've really completely flipped that on its head. And setting expectations is not bad and confrontation is not wrong. respect is required. Integrity is the utmost important. And um, we don't have to be the loving atmosphere that you have at home. Everybody is here for a paycheck. That is the reality. And a culture of performance can be fun. It
Love
really
that.
can be, but
So true.
transparency is required. And you got to be honest with yourself and the people in there.
So true. I love that. Just around making sure that you let people know what the expectations are. And you mentioned it in the casting and onboarding process. This isn't 90 days down the road where now there's already some type of confusion and maybe even team member engagement issues, which then creates a revolving door. And I always tell people, if you see you have a turnover issue, it's not that 120-day mark. It's not even that 90-day mark. I'm going to, when you were interviewing, I'm going to the casting or recruiting and onboarding process. That is typically where there are errors. And to your point, it's expectations. I truly believe people wake up and they want to go do a great job. They just don't realize what are the rules of engagement? What are the specific step-by-steps, SOPs or what have you, the
What does
work.
a great job? What does a great job look like? What is
Exactly.
required of me? Absolutely. And something that we have found tremendously beneficial. We do 30, 60, 90-day reviews with all team members,
Oh, I
regardless
love
of
that.
it's an opportunity for both sides to come to the table to say what's working, what's not working, and where did we miss? Is there anything we miscommunicated that we're not meeting your needs on, and vice versa? People really appreciate honesty. They appreciate transparency, and they're quite malleable to change if you're communicative on what you want to see. So I agree.
Great best practice there. And actually something you just made me think of as we've gotten to chatting a couple times now or so. You've brought up the EOS framework, right? The EOS implementation. I think a lot of people still don't realize what that is. And I bet those listening are probably going to lean in a little bit more. And it's like, what the heck is that? Do you mind walking through? That's a big part of when you talk about operating playbook and goal setting and recognition, development, accountability. How do you use the EOS framework?
I'm going to say it 3 times because it's so important. EOS, EOS, EOS. Man, it's been a game changer for my business and ultimately for my life. I found EOS in 2019. So, for those that may not be familiar, the Entrepreneurial Operating System is a pretty simple playbook in order to run the business that you're already running. And without having an hour to explain exactly how it works, the reality is it's a great amount of structure. It creates the right cadence, and you fill in essentially what's important to you and to your organization. What are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? And I think the EOS program just does a phenomenal job of helping you create those expectations, outline what good looks like, as we just discussed, and then holds everybody accountable as long as the system's being leveraged. The book Traction, EOS, I will
Great.
say it again, changed my life. It really did.
Love it. Well, let's go back to the operating playbook. And without sharing the secret sauce, this is more about maybe some generalized things that you would recommend to anyone listening, especially and we hear this word a lot, but it's hard to do, is scaling their organization, their business, their portfolio. Can you walk us through what are your best practices when you speak of your operating playbook? What are those like, we must get these right in order for us to deliver a consistent experience, have success, and scale this beyond the single unit to multi-unit?
A big question, my friend, and I'll do my best to try and
We're
figure it.
still figuring it out.
Yeah. I don't have all the answers. I'll preface with that. I think what works, our starting point for all of my teams, communication absolutely comes number one. And I think in communication is cadence. So weekly calls with the right people. Do you have touch points with your direct reports? And so in I'll take Perspire, for example, with 4 open studios. I have an area manager who oversees 4 studio managers who oversee, the studio teams. And at every level, we have an opportunity for leader to meet their direct reports on a weekly basis. So if nothing else, I know that every person in the organization has an hour every week to communicate good, bad, ugly, what's working, what's not working. I think feedback is a tremendously under-leveraged tool, and that's feedback from the team, that's feedback from your guests. So we leverage a system called Listen 360 and Perspire. So every visit, my morning starts every single morning. It's like 3:30 in the morning. I get the Listen 360 reports, and it's the first thing I look at. And I'm usually really excited to read it. And the first thing we do is evaluate any negative feedback, respond immediately. So we want real-time feedback. And again, that communication piece is tremendously important. So communication would be my number one. You have to be able to scale communication and have the right, again, cadence or meeting pulse, as EOS likes to call it, in place so that your teams have the time to meet. We meet same time, same place every single week without question. And for me, those weekly cadence calls are the most important calls of my week.
It's amazing. I love that.
For me, in terms of what works and what's required on scaling, systems. it's a it's a huge category, and obviously inherent to franchising are systems, but the recognition that you will get some systems from your franchisor, but if you're going to scale, you will also have to scale systems on your own. And this usually starts with HR and some of the joint employership rules that, again, not most franchisors will assume responsibility or necessarily provide a high level of support. So you need to know what systems the franchisor will scale with you and what systems you will need to scale on your own. And in my experience, it's usually not that difficult to find out, right? And the easiest place to start is look at the bigger operators in your system and ask them what they've done, how they've scaled, how they built their teams. But having the infrastructure needs to be able to scale. And to me, systems are the way that you do that. And then the last piece, without a doubt, so critical to franchising is the consistency piece. And man, is that so much easier said than done. But consistency is critical. And when you want to test new variables, you need to understand, right? Just like a scientific experiment, if more than one variable is changed, then you can't really correlate. So if I have 8 locations that are all doing things a bit differently, it's very hard to separate why the high performers are working and why the low performers aren't. If you know that the system is exactly the same at all 8 locations and you change one variable, now you know exactly what lever that you can pull. So I think consistency for me allows you to scale. It's peace of mind at the end of the day. And ultimately, I think people overcomplicate the idea of scaling. In my opinion, you have to just be able to answer the question, what happens when? And if you can answer
So
that question at every level of scaling and every person on the team answers the question in the same way, then you know that you're ready to scale.
amazing. Consistency, systems, and communication. And to your point, Tanner, easier said than done. However, there's the framework. So, what are you doing to get better at those 3 areas with your team and for your team? Curious, Tanner. So, you're an area developer, multi brand franchisee, business owner, and investor. How do you determine where you are investing in next or even expanding territory next? Like what do you do? I'd imagine there's a lot of data collection, a lot of thought that goes into that. How do you do it?
Yeah, it's a hard question to answer, and I can't say that I have a perfect framework for this. Again, I'll relate back to what's your why. I think getting a lot more clear on my why has really allowed me to use that as a filter to say yes or no to opportunities. And I'll give you a specific example. Like my theme for next year is quite simple. It's do more with less. And so I've determined that in my stage of growth, I can get a lot more out of the existing, let's call it 7 stores, right? So I've got 6 open with a 7th in development. I can get a lot more out of the existing ecosystem that I have versus going to look outside and do something new. I love diligence. I love opportunities. One of the pain points of having success is that you just see opportunity everywhere, which is fun, but it's a challenge too. And so saying no in my experience only gets harder. And maybe this is me and maybe this is the reality. So I think knowing your why and being really clear, what is it that I'm trying to accomplish? I think that allows you to really know when to say yes and when to say no. And ultimately, I think it's the diligence process that makes it clear what can fulfill your why. So if I'm clear on my why, I know which direction I want to move in. If I'm evaluating 4 different brands, having folks like yourself on my team, right, to help evaluate the finance piece. Like, I think if I'm clear on my why, the rest of my people can really help me determine the pros and cons. Everything's really just a SWOT analysis at the end of the day. But if you know your true why, then the SWOT analysis should really fit well into this is the option that makes the most sense because this is what gets me closer to my why. I hope that helps.
Telling you, man, you're firing me up again. First of all, I don't hear enough about your why, your mission, your values in combo with a SWOT analysis. That I didn't get that in my MBA course, and we need to start teaching that. That was so good because it is so important when you get in the real deal, right? Not in the classroom and not in a book. The real deal is, yeah, you got to have heart and you got to have some sort of strategy. The why in your competitive analysis, your SWOT analysis, that is so good. And the other thing that you were chatting about and the Tannerism, I'm stealing this, more with less. That's 2026 motto, yes. And so now you got me thinking, what is Tanner doing around automation, AI, or whatever else? Like, how are you going to do that? Can you walk us through? Again, you don't have to spill the secret sauce, but clearly there's all these amazing tools around us nowadays, and our heads are spinning. But yeah, we have this amazing opportunity to
Yeah.
do more with less. How are you doing it?
Rather than talk about specific tools, for me, and one thing that I'm really trying to leverage is how do I ingrain automation, delegation, and AI into our culture? Because the reality is, I can use AI all day long, but I want my entire business ecosystem leveraging AI. And that can't just be me figuring out every piece and place that AI can fit into it. So I think what I'm really trying to strive for more than anything is trying to build a culture of curiosity around AI. I like to say AI is neither good nor bad. It is in the hands of whomever is its agent, right? Can you use it for bad? Sure. Can you use it for good? Absolutely. And so I want to encourage our teams to look at it with optimism and positivity. It's a privilege to be in a physical, brick and mortar service based business because I like to say we're pretty Amazon proof, and it'll be a while until we really see AI, inside of a physical storefront. And so until then, I want to be on the forefront. I want us to be using these tools. And so I think it's about being curious, making sure that our teams see it as an opportunity to level up themselves as well. So it's a tool that I want our teams to be using. Ultimately, how? I think that's a question that a lot of folks are still really working on. There are
Right.
things that we're starting to automate, and we can get into some of those. But I think broad scope for me, it's more about, how do we accept and embrace this? How does the organization accept and embrace this? Um, and it'll be really exciting to see what comes down the pipeline and how we can use it. But if I can get a team and a culture ready and excited about it, then I can introduce it without instilling all this fear or panic. I believe strongly that it's a tool that will help our great people be even better. I
Yeah,
don't think it's
so
going
good.
to.
It's an upgrade. It's to bring more people along. I think that's a great strategy. I get to spend a lot of time with different brands that try to say AI first and push it down, right? And force it. Actually, I had a recent message. Someone DM'd me on LinkedIn. Hey, my company is saying this is mandatory that I have to use AI, and they're not saying we're going to lose our jobs, but they're watching everything that we're doing. Are you concerned? I'm like, yes, that is definitely not the right approach. So, and we've chatted there, and I won't share too much, but or who they were, but yeah, it's like there's a different way to do it. And I love that you want to bring people along and going back to that feedback loop, going back to transparency, going back to creating that infectious optimism. Like, let's do this together. Where can we use it? How do we use it?
And full transparency, because a lot of my answer right now is I don't know. I don't know
Yeah,
how it will
we're all
impact
learning.
us today, tomorrow, next year, and in a decade. So the thing that I can control certainly is awareness, exposure, and then
Yeah.
ultimately I want it to be well accepted. And to your exact point, you can tell an employee, like, do you want to work less and make more? Great, let's do that together. Or you can mandate AI and instill fear that in 6 weeks they're training an AI system that's replacing them, and that may not even be the case. So I'm excited about it. We'll see. For me, it starts with being curious, and I'll leverage my experts like you to find out how I can use it.
Oh man, I'm learning too. We're all learning. Hey, speaking of curiosity and awareness, one thing I love that you post about a lot is the science. You talk about longevity, you talk about just the hormonal impact, the mental health impact when it comes to many of these different modalities, including, and I'm a huge fan of Perspire. You posted something around the longevity economy and how adding life to years, not years to life. I'm like, there it is again. How do you see, whether it's Perspire or any of the franchise systems that you're a part of, that you're owning, or even others that you're not necessarily a part of, how do you see them fitting and uplifting this movement of wellness or wellness living?
Now you're getting me hyped up, Albert.
Here we go. Your turn.
I can talk about this all day long. It's a category I love. It's a space I love, and obviously a space I've invested heavily in. So there's even more incentive there. The exciting thing to me is that wellness is universal. I've said this before and I'll say it again. There isn't a person on planet Earth that shouldn't be engaged in the dialogue of longevity. And I don't care if you want to live to 120 or not. For me, if I want to live to 60, I want to live a damn good 60
Mm.
years. And so again, it really comes back to quality of life. And I think there's a lot of tools and resources and modalities like infrared sauna, like red light, like contrast that will be really eye-opening for most people's health. I also think, and this is maybe a little bit of a devil's advocate opinion, but I think there's also a required conversation to be had, which is the foundation of your health has to be in the right place in order to add some of these sort of extras, right?
What?
If your diet isn't healthy, if you're not sleeping well, a sauna might help that. A cold plunge might help that. An IV treatment might help that, but it's not going to make a substantial difference. These are really supplemental to living a good life. And if anybody questions why I should do any of these things, I think it will make you better at everything that you do. I'm a huge proponent of sleep. And obviously, I'm in the health category. So I'm going to tell everybody to spend time in the infrared sauna, but I also do myself because I'm a believer.
Love that.
It's made me a better brother. It's made me a better son. It's
Really?
a better friend. When your base and your health and your foundation are strong, it creates an infrastructure that you can work off of. If your cup's not full, you can't pour it out into anybody else's cup.
I could relate with that on so many levels. And I've told my story and actually maybe on a couple of different shows back around my battle with anxiety and panic attacks and a pituitary tumor and just how movement, contrast therapy, good supplementation, contrast therapy, like what I saw recently in Perspire is awesome. I had no idea snow shower and halo therapy mist. I'm like, what is going on here? This isn't, I already thought it was an amazing brand, but the experience, and I left coming out of there now on multiple times, just like, wow, I just feel I'm going to go be a better a better dad, better husband. Like I'm thriving right now. I need more of this. But I think you're spot on is having that foundational side taken care of and then making sure that you're optimizing all of that too with some of these different modalities.
Yeah,
So
and it should be fun. This really should be fun. I
yeah,
encourage people to be curious about it, not feel like, this is a mandate. Like I found this space because I was curious and I wanted to take control of my health. But there's a lot of fun stuff out there, and there's a lot of different shapes and sizes and how these modalities are presented. Obviously, I'm biased. I think Perspire has a phenomenal experience, but there's tons of opportunities out there. It excites me for all involved. It really
yeah.
does.
So you have a lot of experience. You grew up in that entrepreneur franchise life, and now you're doing it yourself. You're investing. You have a multi-unit, multi-brand portfolio, and so you get to see all the highs and the lows when it comes to the franchisor, the franchisee. We're one team. However, at times, and I think it's healthy tension, supposed to be that way. If you were to redesign, however, franchising in general, that's that model, the franchisor, franchisee, how would you do it? How would you lay it all out?
You brought this up. I think there is so much power in systems that recognize and invest in the relationships. I think everyone needs to understand franchisor, franchisee is a partnership. It's not a one-way street in either direction. So for me, when I evaluate new brands, I am evaluating a business partner. I think a lot of people think that they're getting a one-stop shop and they're going to get answers to all their questions.
Right.
In my opinion, I think every franchisee should be asking themselves, what is this brand providing for me? But also, what am I providing for it? The system
Mhm.
grow and get stronger with every added franchisee, not the opposite way around. So, while I don't think that I would restructure how how franchising operates, if I were a franchisor and or if I'm speaking to any franchisors, like I really, really, I think it's critical that they get the culture piece of the relationship right. And again,
Right.
I'm talking to franchisees just as I'm talking to franchisors. The tone and communicating feedback, again, on both sides is so important. And I think it can be lost if franchisees are struggling financially. Obviously, it's something the franchisor should know about, should care about. And at the same time, franchisees should also be saying, what can I be doing differently? How can I
Sure.
help how can we work on this together? Because at the end of the day, you're in it together, whether you want to be or not.
Yeah, that's true. You're in the trenches. I love it. Well, I got a couple messages. I do have a newsletter and what I call the VIP. So typically I let people know, hey, so and so is going to be on. I'll tell you, you have a great reputation. People love that you were coming on. And so I have a couple last questions for you just to respect your time. Let's go to the messiness. What's one failure or rough patch that ended up teaching you the most about who you are?
Oh, I have so many of these. I'm going to start with a big one, which is COVID for me. So, 2020, I was a multi-unit franchisee for European Wax Center. We had 12 open stores, a staff of about 160, an area
Wow.
development territory with 26 or 27 studios. So we were supporting a number of franchisees. And man, was that a scary time. I think if anything, it was the time in my life more than any other that I understood the risk that I was taking, right? We sign franchise agreements, we sign lease agreements, we pre-purchase for stuff and we take risk. But that was the true I was sitting in all of my risk. I really felt it. And so one, I think it's important to acknowledge, like, evaluate the risk that you're taking. Signing on the dotted line is fun, and you're certainly in a high energy moment when you're doing it. But also remember to evaluate what does worst case scenario look like, and am I really prepared for that risk? So it taught me a lot. We put people first. We continued to keep 100% of our staff on payroll. I am so proud of that decision. And
It's amazing.
ultimately, if that was a decision that took me down, I would have been okay with it because I think that it was still the right thing to do. So what I learned is, trust your gut and invest in people, not egregiously and not ignorantly, but you need people. And ultimately, you have to invest in your people if you want them to stick around. So that was a big one for me, COVID. I think, another one that I've already alluded to is, certain instances or circumstances where I was growing for the sake of growth.
Mm.
Ego, more locations always sounds better. Being in multiple brands, having this big portfolio, it certainly in the early days, it sounded so cool. And I didn't realize until it was too late that it really wasn't aligned with what I was trying to accomplish, nor did it actually help me accomplish more. Again, this is where my theme comes from: do more with less. You can accomplish so much more than you think you can with pretty diluted focus. The problem is focus is really hard to attain. And so a lot of times, I really try and encourage people, unless you feel like what you've got is working at 110%, fix fix what's in your yard before expanding it to somebody else's, so to speak.
Yeah. Good
Yeah,
call.
a lot of lessons. I think, again, back to where we started: ask for help, ask for help, ask for help, ask for help. Franchising is a beautiful system when folks ask for help and help one another. And the likelihood is the franchisee in another market is going through the same stuff that you are. And not only are they willing to help, they're excited to help because it means that they can pay it forward and help you avoid a mistake. And just like the relationship between franchisor and franchisee, invest in the relationships between Z and Z, and they can be extremely fruitful as well. It's selfish, like, as much as I'd love to say, help your neighbor. And I totally agree. You should. Even if you're selfish, you'll get it back tenfold. So support one another, help one another, and ask for help when you need it. It's very likely that that the answer is there.
Well, it comes back to what you were saying earlier, right? In selfish, but in a good way. It's like filling up your cup, like you were mentioning earlier, so that you can be impactful for many. Similarly, get your house in order, get your yard in order, so that you can be impactful for many when the time is right.
Yeah.
So I think you're spot on. Well, I got one last question for you, and I think I know the answer. I think you're alluding to it, as you were talking about doing more with less. But what is next for you? New brands, new markets, something different, or it's like Albert laser focus. What is it?
I am laser focused, but I am really excited to expand the area development footprint for Perspire Sauna Studio. So I own the territories for Illinois and Wisconsin, and
Amazing.
helping new franchisees is one of the greatest blessing in disguise for me. I really didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I do, but I'm excited. And I love the impact that Perspire makes on, on the staff front, on the member front. I think it impacts communities in a positive way. So I want to continue to grow that, and we'll continue to do what do what we're doing. There will be more down the line. I don't have any secrets to share quite yet, but
They're cooking.
no, I'll stay curious. There's no doubt about that.
Well, we're all watching and we're all following. This was super powerful. Tanner, for anyone that wants to connect with you, learn more about Perspire, more about your brand, your portfolio, or just to pick your brain and, like we're saying, raise your hand and ask for help from someone that's like Tanner, that's done it, has gone through the lows and many highs as well, how can they get a hold of you?
Come find me on LinkedIn, baby. I think that's the best way to do it, and we'll connect from there. But
Awesome.
LinkedIn's a good place to meet people.
Well, as I always say, and for the founders and franchisors and multi-unit operators, franchisees, if you're looking to optimize your cash flow, figure out that break-even point, the scenario-based planning and the real unit economics, the work that I do every day is that fractional CFO that helps fitness, wellness, and franchise brands. So reach out to me at strategointel.com, where we build investor-ready finance systems. My favorite, 13-week cash flow forecast and location level clarity. That means your P&L, balance sheet, and cash flow statement. This has been another episode of The Owner Seat. I'm your host, as always, Albert Ramos. New episodes drop now, Monday and Friday, 8 a.m. Central. Tanner, this was such a pleasure. I learned a ton, and I can't wait to go watch this one back. I typically don't do that, but I'm going to go watch this one back because there was a ton of stuff financially, operationally, but more importantly, people, culture, leadership. So thank you for this. So good.
Albert, you're a rock star. What a pleasure, my friend. Thanks
I'll
so
see you
much.
soon. Thank you, sir. Thanks, everybody.